My name is Liban Abokor. I am a son, a husband, a friend, and more importantly, a proud Torontonian who now finds himself living in Halifax. Uh, in my day job, I'm the managing partner of Reimagine Labs. We're a data analytics firm that helps social and public sector organizations better utilize data so that they can have an easier time doing good. Uh, in my other hat, which I think brings me to today's conversation, I'm one of the co-founders of the Foundation for Black Communities, one of Canada's first ever Black-led, Black-focused philanthropic foundations that is dedicated to driving meaningful investment in Black-led nonprofits and charities across the country to help them ensure they have the resources to make impact and self-determined solution making in really solid and continued ways. So I'm really excited to join here. I think it's such an appropriate conversation that we're having this discussion on during Black History Month, because this, as I often say, despite philanthropy being a Greek word, it's actually Black work. So I think it's so important for us to discuss the different ways that we provide mutual aid, support, and how we express our love of humanity, which is what the phrase philanthropy means.
Absolutely. So let's get into that, because I feel like you're one of the first and the largest Black-led endowment fund that we've had in Canadian history. And I really want you to share some of the strategies that you've taken to build the FFBC. I think people would be really encouraged by that. So can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so the accomplishments and the achievements of the Foundation for Black Communities are, I think, far too often seen in this really fixed way. What are the 6 steps you took to help create this? And I don't think it's as easy as that. It's not that linear. The Foundation for Black Communities is the account, the result, and the work of generations of Black communities that were very clear that the future and prosperity of Black people here and abroad is determined by our own, it needs to be determined by ourselves. And so self-determination is the very foundation of this Black foundation. And as a part of that self-determination, we want to address things like systemic anti-Black racism. We want to address improvement of socioeconomic conditions and so many other things. But at the very root of it is the fact that we know what's best for us. We as a community have our own solutions. And frankly, it is about time, as it's always been at the appropriate time, for us to be able to test out those different solutions. And so that is the very heart of the Foundation for Black Communities. You even see that in the Foundation's inaugural granting program, in its title, the Black Ideas Grant. The purpose is to start investing in the ideas of Black communities so that we actually just say to them, our role is not to come up with a solution. You have it. You have the ideas of what should work and how to improve the conditions of our community. And our job is simply to ensure that the conditions and the resources are there for that, for those ideas to flourish. So that doesn't actually answer your question though, but I did want to just make sure I talked about the context within which the foundation emerges, and that includes decades and decades and decades, if not generations, of Black communities changing policy so that we get the right to vote, so that we get access to education, so that we get access to employment opportunities and find ourselves in key industries such as elected office. You know, thinking about the late, great Lincoln Alexander and so many others till today. And so all these areas, whether it's the Young Street Riot, whether it's the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these significant and meaningful steps create the wind that helps, I would say, progress the ship that later becomes the Foundation for Black Communities. It also takes, these incredible organizations that have existed before us, like the Black Business Professional Association, like the African Legal Clinic, African Canadian Legal Clinic that now is Black, the community health centers that came before us, these Black institutions that created the conditions for advocating for Black self-determination and Black sovereignty. So we're not in a position to take credit for any key steps that we've made, but I'm happy to talk about some of the strategies that I think permitted for the window of time that we had to be maybe better utilized. And that includes a research report that we put out in 2020 called the Unfunded report, where we moved from anecdote to research, hard, straightforward data that talked about how Black communities are historically and persistently overlooked by Canadian philanthropy, and the risks that creates when you have a community with needs, but without the resources to address those needs. And whose responsibility is it when you're not living up to the objectives of the sector, which is to produce public benefit? So if you can't do that, if you can't fulfill the role of public benefit that supports Black communities, then get out of our way and let us do it for ourselves.
Absolutely. And so I feel like you've touched on like the foundation of how you got started, but I'd really like to hear you expand upon some of the gaps and capital that you've been able to address with the work that you're doing specifically for Black not-for-profits and community service organizations.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. But before I do that, maybe I'll take a step back and I'll talk about why philanthropy was the tool that we used. At the time, we were seeing a galvanization around economic prosperity of Black communities here in the country, rightfully so. And we saw the emergence of the Black entrepreneurship loan programs, which later become led and administered by the FACE Coalition and the brilliant CEO, Tiffany Callender. So we saw all this support going to Black businesses to ensure that the economic prosperity and the pathway was there. And what we realized is, in order to supplement that, there have to be social conditions that allow Black economics to flourish. I often say it's really difficult to write a business plan when you're hungry, when you're homeless, when you don't have your healthcare needs met. It's really hard for a Black woman to write a business plan when she's now the sole breadwinner for not only her own children, but then also her parents, because the Black tax, right? And so it's important for us to think about, how do we remove the barriers to economic prosperity? And so that's why we chose to focus on the nonprofit charitable sector. And we thought to ourselves, the best way that we could do that is through philanthropy, because in this country, there's $100 billion plus sitting there in assets intended to support improving the very conditions we talked about. But somehow we don't see that being realized in Black communities to the degree or scale or pace that we see in other communities. And we thought it was about time that we no longer depended on other foundations to support us, though they have the responsibility to, and instead ensure that there was a dedicated service driven by us, for us, and by us. So philanthropy is a really important tool, but it's not the only tool, right? It's not the magic silver bullet that cures all. It's far from that. But it is a safety net that we now have, so that when other public institutions fail, there is a safety net to the safety net, if you will, that ensures that there's a floor for Black communities. But the purpose of a floor? It's to make sure that you don't go any lower. But what we're really focused on is the ceiling. And I think it's really important for us to not look at the Foundation for Black Communities as the end goal. Frankly, it's intended to be an elevator that only lifts us up.
I love that. It's so very necessary. Very well put. So what kind of challenges or barriers do you face in this work as you're, preparing this elevator, and how are you working to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, that's such a great question. One of the biggest challenges I think we have is helping our community, helping our community build, I think, the key anchors that we need. So you think about the consequences of historical underfunding. You have really, really great organizations with amazing ideas that have been underfunded. So in many cases, these organizations, and then therefore the services they offer, are often in jeopardy. And so the first challenge that we face is ensuring that we solidify those programs so that no matter where you are in the country, you as a Black community member can get access to the necessary supports that you need. So we're talking about stabilization. That's
Mhm.
our first challenge. And stabilizing an entire ecosystem of Black organizations is not the work of one group. So the next challenge is, how do we activate other stakeholders who ought to be playing and doing this work? When we look at the philanthropic sector, you can find dozens, if not hundreds, of foundations and organizations focused on the environment, on gender, on arts, and on many other topics. We need to see a very similar concentration of folks thinking about the Black community. We need Black folks to be seen as constituents of those other foundations as well, because the investments and the resources that they can then bring to bear would ensure that there's a greater impact potential than what the Foundation for Black Communities can do alone. But I can't say that the Foundation for Black Communities is alone in this journey at all. In fact, we have an incredible organization here right with us today, the Dream Legacy Foundation, that is making it its point and its intention to provide similar supports as to the one that FFBC does. We also have the Black North Initiative. We have the Black Opportunity Fund. We have so many other emerging organizations. If you go to Western Canada, you have Africa Center. You go to Quebec, you have a group Transet. You go further east, you have BBI. You go further west, you end up having organizations like Hogan's Alley and so much more. We have these really wonderful and in many ways still emerging organizations that I think are going to create that network that we're talking about, that are going to become so important to support and meet the needs of our community. That said, those institutions need to be well resourced, right? And so when we think about additional capital that needs to be attracted, we need to make sure that other levels of government, like provinces and municipalities, as well as even the federal government that made a historic $200 million commitment, don't begin to think to themselves that the job is done. It hasn't even started. Then we need to think about the private sector. What role do they play? And can we bring them on? And that's where I think some of the really great work that organizations like Black North have been doing, engaging the corporate sector to ensure that they don't only think about Black communities as a flyby thing, but as, enter into long-term meaningful partnerships. And, I want to give a shout out to like Dahabo, the CEO of Black North, who's been doing work like that, or even folks like Craig Wellington at the Black Opportunity Fund, who are making sure that the corporate sector doesn't negate its responsibility or abdicate its responsibility to Black communities. So I think there's lots of really good work happening here. So the challenges you're describing, there are Black community leaders that are actually addressing this. So to me, I don't think about the challenges as much as I think about how do we support those leaders who are already doing the work to ensure that their efforts will be impactful and the outcomes that they want more achieved. And so FFBC is eager to figure out, how do we support, where do we fit in, and how do we plug into those efforts that are ongoing.
Right. Now, I know you mentioned a lot of different organizations across Canada. Now, we just recently talked about some of the challenges that you've been able to face with FFBC, but what are some of the important challenges that you feel need to be addressed for the greater sector, the philanthropic sector, for Black organizations to really thrive?
The answer to that is quite simple, Bless. Black-led organizations need core funding, multi-year funding, and they need to be trusted that they're going to be on a learning agenda. I'm going to go through that one more time. They need core funding. You can't operate an organization, you cannot service communities when you're literally thinking about keeping the lights on continuously. Someone once said to me, if I believed in reincarnation, I would not want to come back as a Black ED.
That's very specific.
Right? Because what they're saying is the Black ED has to think about fundraising from a dry pool, then servicing a community that has significant needs, all while doing it with both hands tied behind their backs and empty cupboards. That's not the kind of condition we can continue to permit to exist. So all those organizations that I met, including the Foundation for Black Communities, our focus needs to be on ensuring that we're driving permanent core funding to Black communities in the same way that the YMCA receives that, the Boys and Girls Club receive it, the Wood Greens of the world, and so many other organizations that are not necessarily white-led, white-focused, but are serving the charitable nonprofit sector. Number two, it has to then become multi-year. You can't take a 2 or 3 year view to systematic, decades long problems. If you want to solve a generational crisis, you got to give it a generational focus, right? And so multi-year funding is going to be critical. And then finally, we've got to trust our organizations that they're going to make learning, they're going to be learning the entire way. Meaning, if they try something and it doesn't work, that is not a failure. What that is that we've learned that this approach doesn't work, and we must be permitted the opportunity to pivot. I remind folks that the YMCA is over 100 years old, right? I don't think any one of us would go to our local YMCA and say that they got everything right. And that's the same thing that's going to be true of our Black organizations, right? We're going to learn what is needed in different contexts for different populations. We're going to need to be more data driven to understand what is actually the effective intervention versus the ineffective intervention. And we need to be given the opportunity to learn, as I continue to say. And so those are the three things that I think are critically important to support Black communities. If you don't do that, anything else is frankly window dressing. You're not going to have a sustainable, Black-led, robust, and effective ecosystem that meets the needs of our communities with those three conditions. And in order to achieve those three conditions, it cannot only be Black-led organizations that are resourcing, supporting this work. We need to see others. We need to see municipalities. We need to see the provincial government, the federal government, which are often the largest segments of the funding portfolio of the organizations that I mentioned in the past. We need to see the corporate sector coming into play, and we need to see the broader philanthropic sector also supporting. Finally, I think there's a role for the individual as right? I think that there's so much capital. I think, you go to a mosque on a Friday or a church on a Sunday or a Saturday for a 7-day Adventist, I didn't forget you. You're seeing so many of us put our money forward in almsgiving, right? And so there's also a rich and consistent tradition of Black individuals supporting our own work. And I think we can do a better job of matching individual Black giving to the work of these organizations, something that we haven't done, but that other communities have been able to utilize far better than we have.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I've always said I would love to see, the for-profit, the corporate side of our community really pool together. I think we could address, like, for one, the affordable housing crisis. if just, event spaces were to come together and other, for-profit. So I think we should really lean into that. Thank you for touching on that. And at that point, do you have any key priorities that you're working on right now that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so the Foundation for Black Communities doesn't have key priorities that it's working on, but there are some really interesting priorities that we're hearing from community. I'll touch on the one that you just mentioned, housing. And I'll share a quick story about myself, maybe to help set that story. In 2001, my mom bought our first family home. It was a small home in Scarborough, wartime. That home wasn't only in sanctuary, it actually became the financial accelerant that we needed. It paid for the university and colleges of my siblings. It even paid for some of our weddings, right? It helped. My mom would take out, I remember, I didn't know at the time, but I learned later, she would take out home equity loans so that we could provide remittance back home when there were droughts when there were conflicts back home. You're talking about so many things that are tied to home ownership that are go beyond just making sure that you have a roof over your head. So home ownership is a critical element or area that we know Black communities are desperately wanting to see improved. If not only home ownership, even affordable housing in general. And then from that, seniors housing, which is becoming a quickly emerging need in Black communities. So those are areas that I think are going to be generational challenges, especially in cities where young Black professionals are increasingly finding it harder to live and therefore be in places where there are centers of employment because they cannot afford the housing costs. So this is a huge crisis. Similarly, there's another crisis on the horizon, and that is labor. With increasing technology, we're finding that many of the industries that we were told that we could apply for and work in are probably not going to be as labor thirsty, if you will, as we once thought. Whether it's automation, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's improvements in technology. So I think there's a number of challenges that are facing our community. I wouldn't say many of them are new, but many of them are becoming more stark and acute in their impact. Finally, I think another challenge that is important that we're seeing at the Foundation for Black Communities is, how do we know what works? Where is the data that tells us what's working, and how then do we draw attention to it? And so I'll give you one example of that in the philanthropic scene. In the late 90s, late and early 90s, if you went to any foundation across the country, you were probably getting applications that spoke to the need to offer mental health services. But the language at that time didn't exist around mental health, the lexicon. So we were overlooking it. And then it's not until the early 2000s where the language of mental health emerges. And now all of a sudden in 2020, the majority of programs are linked in one way or another to improving mental health as an outcome. But if we had actually better data analysis instruments, and we have better data analysis evaluations, we would have actually identified the tremors from the 1990s and started investing in the early 2000s, and we wouldn't be where we are today. So I share that to say that data collection, analysis, and utilization is another challenge that I think we can't overlook, despite the twin employment and housing issues that are probably the most prominent in our work.
Absolutely. So what are some of the key learnings or actionable insights as the co-founder of FFBC that you'd like to share with us as well?
First and foremost, you're not going to do anything by yourself, including or singularly as an organization. As I mentioned in the beginning, the Foundation for Black Communities exists because there were so many important and critical organizations that came before us that set stages, and that we then still today get to work with. So I think it's really important to recognize that you're not going to do this work alone. Number two, I think it's critically important for us to be aware that policy is just as important as the actual practice or the services you offer. As we think about building housing, we have to think about how are the policies that inform and constrain the building of housing, whether it's zoning, whether it's access to financing. How do those things either permit or prohibit that work? So a focus on policy is really, really, really important. That's what we did at the Foundation for Black Communities. We looked at the policies that were constraining giving to Black communities, including the Canadian Revenue Agency's limitation on grants to non-qualified donees, and we targeted that to ensure that that could be eased so that more money can flow to Black communities. So policy is going to be an element that I would say is as a lesson that we learned. And then finally, I think another important lesson that we're still probably learning, but I can share, is research and data, which is my last comment. It's important that if we're going to discuss problems, we don't talk about it only as anecdotes, but that we actually can show, numerical and statistical um, uh, verification of the problem. Black folks are often told, tell us why. And while you and I can talk about the why together in a narrative form, in many cases, people want to see the actual numbers and not simply narrative. So I think research and investing in research is going to be really important, because at that point, you're not disputing me, you're disputing the numbers, and good luck doing that.
Absolutely. So very true. I think we have to try to shift. Well, I mean, we've been trying to shift to adjust to make it about the numbers. But like you said, I think I mentioned that in a meeting this week. Have you guys considered focus groups over surveys? I think people are surveyed out and you can get a lot of the same information from, open discussion. So very true. Having said all of that, how do you feel about the future of philanthropic capital in Canada right now?
Yeah, I think that we're at a really interesting point, right? You're I'm trying to remember the stat around how much how much wealth has been generated just after COVID, right? We're seeing lots and lots and lots of growth in wealth. We're also seeing the disparity grow, right? So I think there's a challenge that question we have to ask and say, is Canada a more equitable and fair place today than it was 5, 10 years ago? I think for many of us, we can say honestly, whether just based on housing as an example, that it's not as fair, it's not as equitable, and it's likely not the kind of place we want to see or thought that Canada would be in. And so the future of philanthropy is about ensuring that wealth wealth disparity that's occurring, it's it can be addressed in a few ways. One is creating the conditions that would encourage individuals who have such wealth to not only give, but then when they give, to see those assets as public assets, not as private altruism. And then when that occurs, ensuring that the demand for greater transparency on how that money is given away is actualized. So at the Foundation for Black Communities, we're incredibly open and transparent about how we give money away. If you go onto our website, www.forblackcommunities.org, and you go look under our granting streams, you get to see exactly the way that we make our decisions. We have a community-led process that ensures individuals from the communities that applications are coming in from are the ones who are adjudicating it, because we believe those folks on the ground have a better idea of what they want to see funded in their community than someone like me who's probably not from there, or our staff or other board members. So transparency in how we give and who we give to is critically important, and that's a thing that that I think is changing in philanthropy. More and more folks want to see how the money is being given away. And then I mentioned the impact that it's having. If you have a granting strategy for 10 years and you can't show what it's actually changed, then don't do it, right? Like change, take a pivot. And then finally, ensure that the folks who are most affected by an issue are the ones at the center of the decision making, right? I think that's a demand that's being made of philanthropy. But however, as what do they say about power? It's quiet. Um, and in this case, it's beyond quiet. It also seeks to be avoidant of accountability. And that's something that we can't permit any further. We have to ensure that everyone is being called to the conversation around how we can address these gaps. And if folks don't want to join, I think we need to be more mindful of, as I said, about the policy conversations that might compel them to join the discussion.
Absolutely. So I really love all your thoughtful answers. I think you've given us a lot to really chew on. Do you have any additional closing thoughts or specific calls to action for the community?
Yeah, I think the call to the community is that we're not going to do this work alone as individuals or individual organizations. I think there's going to be a tremendous there continues to be a tremendous opportunity for organizations to work very closely together on shared mandates. I think there's an opportunity for us to actually better understand what our key areas of advantage are. Like what are organizations really good at? And then how do we ensure that that's where we focus and then take that focus to complement other organizations? And I think I'm seeing that level of collaboration happening uh, uh, a bit better now, if I can be honest, right? We were in Ottawa recently for Black History Month celebrations, and there were, a number of incredible Black-led organizations present, and the camaraderie around the leadership was something inspiring. Like no one was standoffish, you know what I mean? Like folks weren't in their own corner thinking about themselves. People were asking, what is it that you need? How can I help? What can we do together? Like that's really amazing to me, right? It's that level of, I think, collegiality, the level of engagement that's going to be important. And then my call to action is if you have a project, take one other organization with you. Try partnership as a part of your work. I'm telling you, there's always another group that can be involved in the discussion you're having. Bring someone along. That's going to be really, really, really critical. Then finally, if I can say, is never close a door that you entered. If you have a really great conversation with, let's say, a corporation, don't let the deal that you just made with that corporation or the foundation be the only. Like make sure that someone else comes behind that door after you. Don't close the door after the discussion is done.
Absolutely. I'm heavy on the reaching back and, letting people know about the opportunity that you just opened up and, seeing how they can tag along. I love that. And making partnership a part of your plan from the beginning, right? Like always be thinking who makes sense to collab with. And I always encourage people like, who do you want to work with, but also who do you think wants to work with you, who would benefit from the little brand that you have or the established brand that you have. So I love that you touched on that. Thank you so much. Those are my questions. I just want to open it up to the floor and see if there's any questions from the audience. If anybody has some, you can go ahead and drop it in the chat, because Liban is a great mind to tap into. So let's take advantage while he's here. I know the chat was getting fired up when you said we can't do this alone. And nobody wants to come back as a Black ED. They said, say it louder. So you definitely got them fired up over that. If we have any questions,
Yes.
go ahead.
All right. All right. Good day. Good day. My name is Asim. I respect the information you've been sharing so far. One of the things you touched on that stood out to me was grants. You were saying there was a portion in which we can access to learn more about grants. I've noticed there being a challenge in getting to grants, so I wanted to know if you could elaborate more so on how the foundation would assist in that process.
Yeah, peace to you, Asim. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm going to answer the question the way that I think I understand you, and
Okay.
I'll talk specifically about FFBC. So the Foundation for Black Communities, if you go on our website, www.forblackcommunities.org, we have a section that talks about all the granting programs that we have. So one of the existing programs that we just closed on February 1st is our Black Ideas Grant. And under our Black Ideas Grant, it has three components, or streams. One was our core grant. You can get access to $40,000 unrestricted capital to help an organization access resources, supports, technology that it needs in order to achieve its mission. Then our next was the catapult, which was up to $100,000 to help organizations that have an existing program that is effective and that they want to either continue or expand to reach new populations or to new communities. And then finally, we have our third, which is our community capital stream, which is up to $250,000, which is intended to invest in Black social infrastructure. This is such an important element. So many times we hear about Black folks getting spaces, and then 5, 10 years later, those spaces close, right? Or a kind of service that we're offering no longer being offered. So we wanted to ensure that we were providing meaningful investments to ensure that those Black spaces, virtual or in real life, continued. And the eligibility for any of those programs is really simple. Are you Black led? Are you Black serving? Are you Black focused? And you don't have to be a charity. You don't even have to be a nonprofit. You can be a collective of Black community leaders from your community. So we made it such that we try to remove as many of the barriers to access as we possibly could. And even when we did that, we recognize that we can't fund all the projects that come our way, right? So maybe I'll add one more point. Once those applications come in, we even went a step further to say, why should someone from Toronto make a decision about what gets funded in Winnipeg? Which is why we have an open and transparent community selection process that removes us from deciding who gets funded to putting in the hands in our community. Then we went further and said, yo, if we get 1,000 applications, but we can only fund 100, what happens to that other 900? In the past, what the Foundation for Black Communities has done, and we really want to figure out how to continue it, is we actually take those projects that we think are really, really solid, but we couldn't fund it. We take it to our partners across the philanthropic sector. Hey, United Way Toronto, here's a really great project that we couldn't get to, but you probably should think about supporting. Or Toronto Foundation, or Calgary Foundation. Shout out to you, Charles. Alberta's not free from this, right? See you on the call, Charles. How does Calgary Foundation investments, or Vancouver, or one of our corporate partners like MLSC? So we try our best to create as many of these support systems as we can. Further to that, Asim, is we've run programs called events called Meet the Funders, because one of the things that we know is if you don't know who to apply to, or you don't know which program exists, you can't get access to dollars. So we also try to ensure that we're not telling the Black folks, the Black communities, to come to us alone, but we're actually introducing them to other funders that they can build relationships with, which are the first step of knowing the knowledge and then thinking about how to get access to the support. Did I answer your question, Nasim?
Yes. When you mentioned that if the person's in a different area, then you would reevaluate you being in a position to determine if they're eligible. Do you have people in other areas that then assess?
Yeah, so the Foundation for Black Communities has community selection circles. In each province has a community selection circle. Some of the provinces, like Ontario, where there are larger Black populations, they have several community selection circles. Those community selection circles are self-nominated, so the FFBC doesn't select them. We actually put out a call in December, so anybody who's Black could have put their name forward to say, I want to be a community selection member, and then they would have been able to be a part of our adjudication process.
Right.
Happy to answer any further questions related to granting. You feel free to email us at fundfund@forblackcommunities.org, and we're happy to answer any granting messages, as well as some of our upcoming grant opportunities.
That's great. Thank you. I know people can definitely take advantage of the fact that they can send you a DM in your inbox, but if anybody else has any questions, feel free to unmute. Charles?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Blessing. Hi, Liban. Good seeing you. It's been a while since
Hey, Charles.
the early days of FFBC, and yeah, I'm gonna thank Victor for just reaching out and say I should get in this meeting. So yeah, for people who don't know, I'm Charles Buchanan. I'm with Technology Helps, and we're focused on eradication of technology poverty in community and in the nonprofit sector. So my question to you, Liban, and I think we've talked about this a while back, is how important is technology and data? I know you talked about data from the community standpoint, but let's talk about data from the impact measurement standpoint. How important is data and technology for this kind of work? And what is FFBC doing? I know you're a young foundation, to help other funders or to lead the way in grant making around things that are important but have been overlooked by funders for many, many years.
Yeah, leave it to the tech guy to ask a tech question. Charles, it's good to see you again. Data is really important, both its generation, right? Generating data, collecting the data, utilizing it, and then drawing insights from it. That's where our $40,000 grant comes from. organizations are sitting on a wealth, whether it's around the clients that they support, the community members they support, information around how many services or interventions that they've had, and then the outcomes around the surveys that we often do post-program. So we can find linkages, say, you know what, when I do 10 workshops, here's the surveys outcomes are this, what does that mean, right? So there's lots of things I think we can learn from the data, but one of the things you can't do with data is not useful unless you don't have the means to collect it. So data collection technology, like whether it's a CRM or these pieces, is something that's critical. That's where the core grant can be really useful, helping you be able to purchase the right CRM. Thinking about the actual tools, like, I know it sounds really simplistic, but a computer or internet. When the COVID happened, we found that there was a shift and a pivot to hybrid programs, and yet most organizations were probably not digitally able to provide services in a online format. So how do you take a program, create a digital format of it, and then have the infrastructure to deliver that? How then do you actually think about the data security, right? Which is another element of this, because you're now collecting and have these conversations in online spaces, sometimes around really, really sensitive topics. And how do you think about protecting that data? So the foundation would be able to fund you to be able to get that data security and cybersecurity work. So we're talking about whether or not you wanted support with buying computers and hardware, getting the appropriate software to create data security, thinking about data collection tools, helping you be able to, this is this isn't a plug, I'm not getting paid, but how do you get the resources to hire tech helps to provide you with their data backend? These are the kind of things that I think the Foundation for Black Communities wants to continue to be a supporter of. And then there's also, how do you get access to being able to ensure that we fill the digital divide on utilizing emerging technologies like artificial intelligence to make the delivery of your business opportunities easier, better, and more future facing. Did I answer your question, Charles?
Yeah, I think because I think there are other. It's a long conversation we could get into when next time I'm traveling.
Yeah,
but
I'm mindful of the time, but I'm more than happy. Could I put you on the spot for a second, Charles? Because I think we're going to benefit from it. What are the 2 or 3 things that you think the foundations, not only FFBC, should be thinking about? This is also an opportunity for us to learn.
So yeah, I would be on the data, the technology bandwagon, platform all day long. But it's like the most important thing is that we have to stop seeing technology and data as back end or overhead, right? These are critical things. Like the average organization now is almost like a technology business that offers services. Technology is fundamental to it, so it cannot be seen as separate and secondary. The cybersecurity is not going away. We live in an unsafe world from a data standpoint. And if we're not protecting our communities and we're not protecting the people that we serve, then we're doing them a disservice. So those are 2 of the main things. And AI is a whole other conversation. We are going to have to just understand it and stop fearing the technology and realize that we live in this space and it's important that and it's going to be here. It's not something you set and forget.
Thank you for that, Charles. I think we have another question from Kwamena Mensa, if you want to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Peace, brother. My name is Kwabena. My question is, I've been hearing about FFBC all over the country, so I want to know, what has been your marketing strategy?
Yeah, okay. What is our marketing? Wow. Were you listening to our team meeting last week or something? Is that, are you hacking on me? Okay.
You feel attacked?
No. It feels like, because we're talking about how to ensure that we have even a broader reach than we do. So I don't know if we have a broad reach now, or if Kwame is saying we need to have a broader reach. We spend a lot of time building relationships. It's not about putting out a LinkedIn post or or an email blast. It's about spending time with organizations across the country. Our staff and our founders, Dr. Joseph Smith Jr., Rebecca Darwin, Jacka Blea Marr, and the rest of our board, we spend an inordinate amount of time attending community events, making sure that we're out there speaking to folks, including our staff. So if you meet someone if you hear about FFBC, it's most likely you've heard about FFBC from someone from FFBC, because we think that those relational word telling is really important. And then also we use tools that everyone else uses, right? LinkedIn, we use our Twitter, we use our Instagram, and we ensure that we try to get information out there as democratically as possible. And then we're really fortunate and blessed to have really great friends. Like I mentioned, Black-led organizations from a partnership standpoint who willingly share our information with their colleagues, right? Whether it's the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, like NAPSI, who I forgot to mention earlier, but which is a phenomenal organization doing some great work in this country around not only supporting Black communities, but the policies that need to underpin the success of Black communities. Whether it's the FACE Coalition, whether it's the Africa Center, whether it's groups like I think I see my brother Clement here from the BIPOC Foundation, and so many others. And then, of course, organizations like Setsi, right? Who are really, I don't think anyone knows what Setsi is. I just call them the backbone of the Black community, right? And like they're Setsi's everywhere, connecting like that ligament that connects everything that is Black. And make sure if you don't know about what's happening, they're going to tell you, buddy, like, do you know this thing is happening in the Black community? You should get connected. So those are some of the things we're doing, Kwamina. There is no magic sauce. And then we also have like really curious and passionate Black community members that reach out to us and then go back and share with their community. So those are some of the things we use, but there's, I think we can even do better, because it's not only about hearing about FFBC, but it's about how can we turn that connection to some kind of benefit for you. How can Kwamina hear about FFBC, and then how can we connect you to another funder? How can we give you a piece of information that lets you do your work a little bit easier? So we want to move from connection to somehow to some kind of collaboration. That's the best kind of, I think, marketing. When you go from hearing about us to be able to work with us. And that's what we look forward to and aspire.
Great answer. Thank you so much.
No problem, brother.
I love it. Thank you. Ryan, now you're up.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Blessed. Always good to see you. And thank you, team. Always good to see you, Liban. And thanks, Victor, for reminding me. I had this marked on my calendar and got distracted. So I'm glad you're able to post out again. Liban, I noticed that the application process for the FFBC was a lot smoother than other grant applications that I've seen. So I was curious, was that developed to mitigate, pre-existing challenges that you might?
Yeah. So there's first and foremost, shout out every intermediary of the Supporting Black Communities Initiative. Every single one of them. They literally sat with us, right? And they helped us learn about the things that went well and the things that did not go well. So I think it's so important, right? That we comment on how important the support and collaboration of other Black community organizations were. Then shout out Black leaders like, you, Ryan, who we reached out to make sure that you told us what are some of the things we need to be mindful of that could dissuade Black communities from applying, right? Setsi played a role in the Network for Advancement for Black Communities, so many others. If I'm giving shout outs to other organizations, it's to be very clear that the Foundation for Black Communities literally exists as a culmination and a collaboration of so many of these different efforts, right? So the other part is we have a lot of experts in philanthropic grant making and the charitable sector. Our team is I don't want, humility is important, but we have the best philanthropic charitable sector leaders anywhere in the country that are Black working right here. And if we don't have them, then we're connected to them. Like, Brother Ikem Opara from the Rita Hall Foundation, who we say, what are some of the things that you learned about? former staff that used to work at FFBC who were fundamental, like the brilliant brother Omar from Ontario Trillium Foundation, who was critical in helping us think about what are some of the things that they learned in other philanthropic foundations that they worked at that we should think about avoiding. If the Foundation for Black Communities granting system is effective, it's because we listen to Black folks.
Love that, love that. And Bless, if I could, a follow-up question, you mentioned like there's going to be a lot of people that apply and don't get funding. I was curious, is there anything that us as organizations can do to support those that don't get funded and what they can do to better prepare themselves for next time?
Yeah, I think it's useful to say that you not getting funded wasn't because you weren't better prepared, right? Like we're talking about a marketplace of asks, right? Marketplace of ideas. And sometimes there's an idea in that community that just resonates more than the idea now. So I think it would be unfair to tell someone you didn't do hard enough, you didn't try hard enough, no. Sometimes you did, but it just wasn't the right market fit for this particular grant call. So what we should be doing is taking those really great projects to other funders, right? Like it's us saying, hey, by the way, we have 2,000 asks, we have 120 projects that we're going to be able to fund. What happens to the other 98% of projects? Well, guess what? We're not the only game in town. We need to be able to walk to every other foundation. We need to walk to the federal government and say, here's the demand, right? Here's what we're able to take care of. So who's going to help with the rest? How do we call people in to assist? And you do that really well, Ryan, right? And so a part of that is telling our story, maybe back to Kwame, and telling the story about all the really great projects out there and connecting others to be able to support them.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks so much.
No problem, Ryan.
Thanks for your question, Ryan. Thank you to everyone with their questions. Thank you everyone who tuned in. I don't see any more hands or anything in the chat. I think that Liban is so detailed. Oh, we have Clement. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Clement.
Thank you so much, Sister Bless, and wonderful presentation, Brother Liban. Just a quick question. Thank you for the work that yourself and your team are doing. Do you have any strategies that yourself and your team are putting in place with regards to ensuring that these supports are equitable across the nation and folks in rural communities are also getting the needed support through this process?
Clement, good to see you again, brother. I'll say it very clearly: the West will not be forgotten. just to be really explicit about that. So the Foundation for Black Communities is using a formula that, again, it's only going to need to get improved. That looks at a few things. Number one, where is the Black populations across Canada? That's number one. Like, where is the current baseline? Number two, where do we see growth in Black populations? Because you can't just invest for today. You have to be thinking about future forward and looking. Then three, we think to ourselves, even if the Black population is the largest in places like Quebec and Ontario, well, that's where the greatest access to resources are as well, Ontario and Quebec. So if you think about it from a proportionality standpoint, you actually take a very inequitable approach, because you might be funding them at a proportional rate, but you don't take into account that a Black community in Saskatchewan and Nunavut only have access to maybe 10 funders, where Ontario and Quebec have access to 100 funders. Do you follow me, Clement? I'm gonna take that as a yes. So what we've done is, yeah. So what we've actually done, to be clear, and no, our apologies to people in Ontario, in Quebec, we actually suppressed the number of projects that'll be funded in Ontario and Quebec, and we over-index on Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, Alberta, and in the Atlantic region, because we know that those communities are often not going to have the greatest number of other funding opportunities that Ontario and Quebec have. So we're guaranteeing that a certain number of projects will be funded in every single province, and the proportion will often be larger than the population that lives in that province, and for the reasons that I explained. So the answer is equitable funding is something that we give a lot of thought to, and we're going to ensure, and we'll see from this granting decision that we make how that looks. And if we're not perfect the first year, then we're going to try to figure out how to make the adjustments for year two. The other part I think is really important and fair to make, important to say, is it's also where the applications come from, right? We're still looking at our data, but the overwhelming grants are coming from places like Ontario and Quebec, which aren't surprising. And it's not for the lack of outreach or marketing. It's also because that's where the largest number of Black-led organizations exist.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. If Obi's here, I think we have a video that we want to play. Are you here, Obi or Brother Victor?
Yeah, Brother Obi, if you can play the DLF video. But once again, we just want to thank Liban for your brilliance. As always, brother, you show up and you show out and you represent us well and you make our ancestors proud. And I'm just honored to be your beloved brother. And all the folks, Clemens, Ryan, Asim, Shayna, Effia. There's so many folks in the room here that I'm so happy attended. I even see our colleague, David LePage. Obi, if you can put the survey in the chat before you play the video. And David LePage, I'm going to big you up as an ally. David LePage wrote a book called Marketplace Revolution. His book's in the chat as well. Obi, hit the video.
Step into the transformative Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, BEC, a pivotal federal Black entrepreneurship program component. In partnership with Carleton University's Sprott School of Business and the Dream Legacy Foundation, BEC endeavors to revolutionize our comprehension of Black entrepreneurship in Canada. Beyond a mere hub, BEC encompasses 6 regional research hubs, generating vital data to empower Black founders nationwide. Discover the stories of Black entrepreneurs in the Dream Legacy Foundation, spearheading BEC initiatives nationwide. We unite a community of entrepreneurs, nonprofits, schools, and researchers. As a central hub, Dream connects individuals and supports Black entrepreneurs in Canada. Join our live Zoom sessions on Thursdays at 2 p.m. EST to acquire new skills and be part of the exciting journey. What else does the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub offer? Delving into the role of a database for Black entrepreneurs in Canada, BEC provides a potent networking tool linking entrepreneurs with like-minded individuals, partners, mentors, and advisors. Navigate the Black entrepreneurship ecosystem with BEC's map. Engage in surveys representing Black voices accurately, contributing to a nuanced understanding of diversity in entrepreneurial landscapes. Amplify your voice by completing the survey and be a vital force in shaping the narrative of Black businesses' success in Canada. Join us in building a thriving future for Black entrepreneurship. Let's join forces to shape the future of Black entrepreneurship in Canada, amplifying our stories, experiences, and collective impact for a thriving and successful community. For more resources that support Black entrepreneurs, click on this link.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And everyone, I believe they said the survey link is in the chat. So let's make our voice known and provide feedback. So save the chat, save the link, click the link so it's open up. And once again, thank you so much, Liban, for coming and sharing. So insightful. We really do applaud your leadership and all the remarkable work that you're doing behind the scenes. Thank you to everyone who's here. And we just want to close off as we started by acknowledging all the original stewards of the various lands that we're on, as well as our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We want to acknowledge our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we continue to stand on as we do this collaborative work for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, thank you to everyone who tuned in today. And thank you so much, Liban.
My apologies. I got to give a shout out to my entire team. It would be crazy not to do that. I want to give a shout out to everyone at the Foundation for Black Communities, specifically our community impact team, I want to give a shout out to Michelle Musindo. I want to give a shout out to Lydia, Evelyn, Ngazi, supporters like Sego, Marlene. The Foundation for Black Communities, those are just some of our staff, Carrie and so many others. I think it's really important because I think far too often the community only hears about Jacka, Liban, Rebecca, etc. But there's a whole team of folks that are working every single day and every single evening and weekend to ensure that we're really good stewards of this capital that belongs to Black communities. And they're incredible brothers. And so sending them like lots of love. And again, thank you for inviting me. Shout out to Setsi, shout out to Beck, Dream Legacy, and Blessed. If I get the chance to continue to interview with you, I do these all the time. So just shout out to you as well. Peace, everybody.